Hello everyone. This week's parasha is Parashat Chayei Sarah. There are two main events that really take up the bulk of this week's parasha. The first, of course, is the fact that Avram needs to bury Sarah and needs to buy her a burial plot. That's the first part, and we dealt with that last year. But this year I want to take up what is actually really the bulk of this week's parasha, and that is the fact that Avram is trying to find a wife for his son Yitzchak, and therefore he sends Eliezer to Aram Naharaim, his birthplace, to find him a wife. And the Torah really goes into an enormous amount of detail when it comes to this. And by the way, of course, this Torah is based on what I heard from Rav Bernstein 3 years ago at Machon Yaakov, but it's available online as well. He speaks about it, I think, in 2011 or 2012. It's even available in his Meshach Chochmah shiur that he printed out last year. It's very similar themes. So what we're really coming to address is how much time the Torah spends to this story, because it's almost it's not even almost unusual, it is unusual. I mean, the Torah devotes about 60 psukim. That's a lot, 60 verses. Because if you're to think of, say, another story, right, like Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Bavel, how much time does the Torah spend there? 9 psukim. 9 verses are dedicated to the entire story of the Tower of Bavel. That's it. That's one of the most famous stories. If you were to ask a kid or even an adult, what's one of the most famous stories in the Torah, and you ask them to name the top 5 or 10, that is for sure going to show up. The Tower of Bavel, of course, but it's 9 psukim. This is 60. So we need to try to figure out what is going on here. And that, in fact, prompted a midrash to say the following: which means the conversation of the slaves of the Avot is greater than the Torah of the Banim. Now that requires a bit of explanation, because what's going on? So by the way, Eliezer, of course, is the slave of the Bati Avot, right, of Avram, and he's really hanging at the center of the story here. Now, what we really want to focus on is that there are a number of the reason why the Torah takes so much time with it is because Eliezer goes, he gets his instructions from Abraham, he goes and he does the test for Rivka, but then, after he finds Rivka and he goes with her to her family to ask if she could come back, we see a repeat of the story. But the repeat has a few changes, right, from the way the story actually unfolded. And we're not going to look at all of the changes, we'll just center in on 2. So that's what we want to look at. I very highly recommend pausing this and going to get a chumash so you can follow along with me with the psukim. But if you don't, then I'll try to make it as clear as possible. So we're in chapter 24, verse 3. I'm going to read mostly in English. And I will have you swear by Hashem. So this is Avram speaking to Eliezer. And I will have you swear by Hashem, God of heaven and God of earth, that you not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. Rather, to my land and to my kindred shall you go and take a wife for my son for Isaac. So the word of the Torah in verse 4 is, Ki el artzi vel moladati telech. Okay? From my land and to my birthplace. Now, if we look at Eliezer's recount to Rivka's family, what does it say? We need to look at verse 37. And my master had me take an oath, saying, do not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I dwell. Okay, that's true. Unless you go to my father's house and to my family and take a wife for my son. What does he say? He says, Imlo el beit avi telech vel mishpachti. As opposed to, what did Avram actually say? El arti vel moladati, to my land and to my birthplace, or my kindred, whichever. Whereas Eliezer says, no. Avram said, Imlo el beit avi, to my father's house, telech vel mishpachti, to my family. That is a change. We need to understand that. That's one. What's the second one? So if you see after and that's verse 37, I think I mentioned that. If we go back to verse 22, here we go. So this is after the test, right? After Rivka passed the test and fed and watered the camels. And it was when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a golden nose ring. Its weight was a beka, and 2 bracelets on her arms. 10 gold shekels was their weight. Verse 23, and he said, whose daughter are you? Pray tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She said to him, I am the daughter of Betuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. So again, chronology. So she finished watering the camels. He gave her the gold. Then he said, who are you, by the way? And she responded. How does Eliezer relate the story? That's not what he said. Let's look at verse 46. So she hurried and lowered her jug from upon herself and said, drink, and I'll even water your camels. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. Then I questioned her and said, Whose daughter are you? And she said, The daughter of Betuel, son of Machon, whom Milcah bore to him. And I placed the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her hands. So here Eliezer switches the order. What really happened was he gave her the jewelry, and then he was concerned, who are you, by the way? Here he's saying, I asked her who she was. Once I found out, I gave her the jewelry. What is behind those changes? That requires explanation, and you can imagine commentators leap on these differences. So we're going to be following the Malbim. So what does Malbim have to say? The point is this. Eliezer's goal underwent a radical change halfway through the story. Why? Because his original goal was to find a girl with good midot to find as a wife for Yitzchak. That is to say, he needed to go and find a girl who had good midot, who's a kindly individual, so that hopefully that would be a wife for Yitzchak. That's what he needed to do. So the strategy was up to him. He decided to go to the well, where people who were particularly important went to go draw water. And of course, he'd conduct the test, which he did, and which Rivka passed with flying colors. And he figured, he's like, look, now I need to go back to this girl's family and convince them to ultimately, kind of marry up, because Avram was very wealthy, and therefore they'd be sending her. It's true, she'd be sent far away, but it'd be to live a life of comfort. And therefore, his task would be that much easier. He succeeded. He found the girl with great midot, and he's able to convince her to convince her and her family to let her come back with him to marry Yitzchak. Okay, but now you can't help but think that Eliezer must have been kind of shocked, astonished, and maybe even totally blown away by the fact that the girl he found was Avram's family. So this is where the goal undergoes a real change, because he needs to convince them to send her back to him. And he needs to make sure that whatever he says doesn't make them stonewall him. Because if he says everything completely unadulterated, there's a high chance that they're going to get offended. And therefore, Eliezer needs to figure out how to tweak the story to kind of make it seem more favorable. And therefore, with the fact that Avram said, go back to my land and to my birthplace, that's fine. Moladati can also be understood to mean to my family. Therefore, that's what Eliezer does. He's like, my master, he wanted me to go back to his family's house. He wanted me to meet you. You guys are, of course, the first choice, which implicit in this is you're not the only choice. You're the first choice, but you're not the only choice. Moreover, you're not like other people. You're Avram's family. Again, you're not like other people. There are other people, just to make sure that they get put in their place. But even so, you guys are special. We would prefer you, but there are other options available. And in this way, he's able to kind of work in Avram's goal of finding a girl for his son, for Yitzchak, to get married to. And there's something amazing about this here, because remember, they could still always ask him, well, then why don't you just come straight to us, right? If that's really what Avram wanted, why did you take so long? So you see, Eliezer is working at his utmost to figure out how to explain this. And ultimately, we need to remember that Eliezer had a daughter, and he actually proposed to Avram that his daughter, as in Eliezer's daughter, should marry Yitzchak, which would be a great shidduch. And Avraham said no. And so Eliezer would have been well within his means. When questioned by Rivka's family, well, why don't you come straight to us? He could have just told the truth. Just say it as it is, and however the pieces fall, well, that's that. And he did his best. That wasn't what Eliezer did. Eliezer was using all of his brain power, all of his capacities to figure out, how do I make this work? That's the will of my master, and therefore I need to do my best to get this result done. And that's what Eliezer did. And what's so beautiful about this is that really explains the midrash of Yafes Sichatan Shel Avdei Batei Avot Mitoratan Shel Banim. The conversations of the Avadim of Eliezer is more beautiful than the Torah of the Banim. What do I mean? Look how much time and space the Torah dedicates to giving to the story of Eliezer, how he went to go do his best, and then how we had to tweak this whole story to make this all work out so that Rivka would be able to come back with him to marry Yitzchak. He did his best. And the Torah wants you to get a sense of that, and therefore spend so much time with it, as opposed to say, certain halachas, right? The Torah and Shalbanim. There, the Torah suffices with a remez, right? Like just a hint of it. Sometimes like Zera Shava, it's very indirect the way you get the halacha. As a perfect example, how do you know you can't eat milk and meat? Many people have this question, because the pasuk says, Lo tevashel g'dibech alevimo, right? You cannot cook a kid in its mother's milk. Well, okay, that's it. That's all the Torah says, really. How do you get the fact that you can't eat milk and meat? How do you know that you can't derive benefit from milk and meat? So that we say, oh, the Torah says, Lo tevashel b'di b'chalev imo 3 times, twice in Shemot and 1 in Dvarim, and the fact that it says that must mean that there are 3 different prohibitions, midoraita. But okay, well, how do you know this applies to all animals? It says, Lo tevashel b'di b'chalev imo. So how do you know it's just not a kid and its mother? All because we know from the fact that k'di is an ambiguous term, it can mean to other animals. The point is, it's such a hint. How do you really need to start extrapolating from those psukim how to get at exactly what the Torah is trying to say, halachically speaking. And yet here, the Torah spares no details. It wants to tell you how it happened, what happened, how Eliezer tweaked the story, in order to give us a sense of what an Eved looks like. And the truth is, Eliezer is never mentioned by name here. Throughout this whole story, he's mostly called Ha'eved. If we look back at the beginning of the 24th parak, look at verse 29. Vayasam ha'eved el yado tachat yerech Avraham. The next pasuk, Vayikach ha'eved asarat malim migmalei adonav. Then again, if you go to verse 17, Vayarat ha'eved likrata. We see mostly he's called the Eved, and he is also, by the way, called Ha'ish, and there's an explanation for that. It is that whenever he's an Eved, that means he's doing exactly what Avram told him as he was told. When he's Ha'ish, he's innovating. He's trying to figure out how best to achieve Avram's goals. But the point is, from this we see what it's like to be a true Eved. A true Eved separates all of his own personal vested interests in the goal to achieve what his master desires, and in that way, we learn an amazing lesson from Eliezer how to be a true Eved and how to serve without our own personal interests in mind. Shabbat Shalom.